Hello out there in Management 386 land. Today we're going to pick up the discussion where we left off with talking about the due diligence we need to conduct in order to complete a business canvas prior to starting a business. And the two squares that we have left that we need to talk about are cost and revenue. Now, of course, these two squares within the business canvas are talking about money. So I can tell you that this is probably one of my least favorite subjects to talk about. And I'll be completely honest with you. When I came through the University of Alabama getting my management degree, I made all A's except for two C's, one in accounting and one in finance. So suffice it to say, working the numbers was not my favorite thing. And the truth is, I think the only reason I got a C in accounting 210 is because it was being taught by a grad student who was a friend of mine. And I think she felt bad for me and just gave me a C so I could be finished with it. So I tell you all that to say, hey, if thinking about the numbers and financial statements and trying to figure all of that out is something that gives you anxiety or is something that you don't love, don't worry, you're not alone. As a matter of fact, I would jump out there and say that 90% of entrepreneurs don't truly understand how to read their financial statements and how to truly adjust their business to make their financial statements look the way that they would like for them to look. And the reason for that is it's a difficult language to speak. It's a difficult one to understand. Well, I hope that what I'm going to do for you over the next few classes is to change the way that you think about your financial statements and help you understand that all of the financial statements are a story. They're a story about your business and about how your business is doing. It's a story that you get to write and rewrite and read. As you're reading it, if you don't like the way the story is going, then you can manipulate the story to try to make it sound more like something that is a goal for you, something that would make you happy. Now, in order to change your mindset about the way that we think about money and financial statements, I want to change a little bit about the way you think about money when it comes to being in business. You see, most entrepreneurs don't start their own business, as you learned in chapter 2, because of money. It's really not the number one motivation factor. As a matter of fact, most people don't choose their jobs and their careers solely based on money. Now, it's important. That doesn't mean it goes away, but there are other things that are actually driving you to start your own business. Perhaps it's you want to be your own boss, or perhaps you're really passionate about the problem that you want to solve for the market. Most of the time, like I said, money is not the motivational factor that causes you to make a decision to start a business or to take a job. Money, however, is a performance measure. We can look at money and how we're doing with money to determine if we're doing a good job in our business or a bad job in our business. The more money that we have, perhaps we're doing a good job. The less money, perhaps a bad job. I'm not sure how it's going to pan out for you, but I know that you can be in control of your money story. So we're going to think about money as a great performance measure. And if it is our performance measure, then how do we look at the numbers that are coming out of our financial statements and how do we judge how we're doing? I'm going to share screen with you in just a moment and use this wonderful digital whiteboard that is my nemesis. You all know this by now. And I'm going to try to help you think about money and financial statements in businesses in a much different way, something that's much easier to interpret. As I told you before, we're going to think about our financial statements as a story. They tell the story of our business. But in order to best understand this story, we need to know who all the characters are and where they live. So we're going to start out today with finding out who all the characters are in our story and where they live. So let me share screen with you here and get to the whiteboard. Adjust my screens for just a moment here. Thank you for being patient with me as everything adjusts. And let's talk about the story of our business and the story of money. Now, there's a cast of characters. Let's learn the characters and let's learn where they live. Now, there's going to be 4 houses in our story. And the first house that we're going to talk about is the startup house. And in the startup house, this is where all the characters who are associated with startup costs live. So it's the startup house. We're going to draw a line right here. Startup costs are all of the things that we spend money on prior to opening our business. Give me 1 second. My screen's jumped around just a little bit. There we go. Everything that we spend money on prior to opening our business. So think about this line as opening day. Now, the cast of characters that could live inside the startup costs are huge. There could be a lot of them and a lot of differing ones that would all really be dependent upon the type of business that you want to start. But some things that we would spend money on prior to opening our business could be, let's just say that we want to develop an app. Then we'd have to spend some money on its development and developers before we ever open. We would also probably spend some money on marketing before we open. Remember, we have to inform the customers about who we are so that we can win them as customers. And we'd want to do that before we open. We want customers our first day. We can't wait till after we open to market. Perhaps we have to have some payroll. We're going to bring in our employees and train them prior to opening day. So as you can see here, we're probably going to spend some money on fees with business licenses or accountants or the lawyer to help us get set up. We could spend lots of money on different things to start our business. And everything that we spend money on is to be recorded in startup costs, everything that we spend money on prior to opening our business. So let's move along. And we've passed opening day. After we pass opening day, then we're going to have a few other houses. We're going to have 3 different houses. And the first house that we're going to talk about is the P&L house. Now, as we learn about the different houses that our characters live in, we're also going to learn that some of these characters and maybe some of these houses have nicknames. So we're going to learn their real names and we're going to learn their nicknames. The P&L stands for profit and loss. So this is going to be our profit and loss statement. Some people also refer to this as an income statement. When we talk about both of those, we're talking about the same thing. So just a nickname. So who are some of the characters who live in the P&L house? Well, the first one is, this is where all the sales live. The sales, spelled S-A-L-E-S, all the sales that we make as a company. And the first sale that we're going to be introduced to is gross sales. Now, gross sales are all of the sales that we make within a specific time period. Now, time period is important because an income statement is looked at for a particular time period. Perhaps we want to look at our P&L for each day of the week, or maybe we want to look at it for an entire week. Most companies look at their P&L for the month. So we would have a P&L for January, we might have one for February, one for March, and we would run it for each of those time periods, January 1 to 31, February 1 to the 28th. And with that being said, the gross sales number that is recorded is the amount of total sales that we had for the time period that we choose. Now, the next character in this house is called COGS. Now, COGS is what I call it because I used to own a bicycle shop and cycling is important to me. But it's actually an acronym that stands for cost of goods sold. Now, cost of goods sold is how much it costs us to produce one unit of whatever we're selling. So, for example, if we decide we're going to build and sell rocking chairs, really nice wooden rocking chairs, we could have a price for selling those rocking chairs of $50 each. So if we sold one rocking chair in the month of January, we would have $50 in gross sales. And let's imagine that it cost us $20 to build one rocking chair. So our cost of goods sold would be $20. This gets us to the next character that we're going to meet in our story. This is another sales character. So we've got gross sales, cost of goods sold. Now it's time to meet the third character, and this is net sales. Gross sales minus cost of goods sold gives us net sales. So if we sold one rocking chair for $50, it cost us $20 to make it, then our net sales are $30. Let's take this just a step further and let's pretend that in the month of January, we sold 4 rocking chairs. If we sold 4 rocking chairs, then we would have 50 times 4, $200 in gross sales. Now, because we had to produce 4 rocking chairs and it cost $20 to produce one, if we sold 4 rocking chairs, then our cost of goods sold would be 20 times 4 would be $80. 200 minus 80, our net sales would be $120. Now, this is just the first set of characters that exist and live inside the P&L house. There are also some others who live down in the basement, and they're really, really important characters. So let's talk about these are on the main floor. Who's in the basement? Well, in the basement, we may have some other things that we have to pay for on a monthly basis. So something that we pay for every month, perhaps we pay rent every month. Perhaps we have to make an insurance payment every month. We have to pay for utilities every month. So you can see here, we could list out a number of things that we pay for on a monthly basis. What's going to happen here is we're going to list out the dollar figure for how much we have to pay for each of these on a monthly basis. And we're going to subtract each one of these from the net sales number. And after we do that, then we get to the bottom line. I'm sure you've heard that statement over and over again. What's the bottom line? Give me the bottom line. Well, this is where that comes from. This is the bottom line. So what we want to do is take net sales, subtract out all of these expenses, and we'll get a number, which is our bottom line. If the number is positive, we have profit. If this number is negative, then we have a loss. Hence the P&L here, our profit and loss statement. Now, let's talk about some nicknames really quickly. I'm going to erase that really quickly because I want to talk to you about some nicknames that we have for the different characters in the P&L house. Cost of goods sold here has a nickname. Its nickname is variable costs. Refers to the same thing. The reason that we call it variable costs is because cost of goods sold varies based on sales. So remember our example. If we sold one rocking chair, our cost of goods sold was $20. But if we sold 4 rocking chairs, our cost of goods sold was $80. So cost of goods sold will always vary based upon our total sales. Now, these little boogers down here have a lot of nicknames, and you've probably heard most of them. So let's start out with the first one. And the first nickname that they have is fixed expenses or fixed costs. It could be fixed expenses or fixed costs. And the reason that we say that they are fixed is because even though the numbers might be different from month to month, for example, we know our utility bill in the state of Alabama is going to be higher in the summer than the winter because we're running our AC like crazy. It gets hot here. So even though the number for our power bill might be different, it's still considered a fixed cost because the different numbers for our utility bill are not dependent on sales. Also, we have to pay these fixed expenses regardless of whether we make sales. These are things that are going to come around every month and have to be paid every month regardless. So that is the first nickname. Fixed expenses do not vary based upon sales. Variable costs or expenses do vary based on sales. Another nickname for these line items is operating expenses. And the reason they call them that is because these are the things that we have to pay every month in order to operate. Makes complete sense. You might also hear these line items referred to as overhead. I'm sure you've heard, oh, we got to reduce overhead. We got to reduce overhead. This is what they're referring to. So to review, let's think about who lives inside our P&L house. Also, income statement, another nickname for that. The sales live there. Gross sales minus cost of goods sold gives us our net sales. After we determine our net sales, then we subtract out all of our fixed expenses, all the things that we have to pay every month to operate. We also think about that as our overhead, and we get to the bottom line. We get to the bottom line, and that number, if it's positive, is profit. If it's negative, that's loss. So this tells you about the characters who live in the first house. Let's move on to our second house. The second house is called the balance house. And this is where the balance sheet resides. Now we've got a few people who live there as well. So let's talk about who lives in the balance house. The first group of people who live here are the assets. Now, assets are everything that we own. And there are two kinds of assets that we'll talk about. The first type of asset is a current asset. Now, these are assets that we expect to turn over quickly, within 30 days or so. Some examples of current assets are our inventory. We certainly hope our inventory turns over quickly as we're making sales. Another current asset is our accounts receivable. This is money that people owe us. So we certainly hope that that's turning over quickly and that people are paying us. Another type of current asset is cash on hand. Now, we all know that our cash on hand or in our pockets changes all the time. Hopefully we get some more cash coming in, we go buy something, we take some cash out. So cash on hand is also a current asset. Remember, these are assets that we think are going to turn over in 30 days or so. There's another type of asset or thing that we own, and these are called fixed assets. Now, fixed assets are things that we expect to keep for a really long time. People also refer to these as like PP&E, which is plants, property, and equipment. So we can think about fixed assets as our cars, company cars. Perhaps if you've got the bicycle shop like I had, it was all the tools that the mechanics would use to work on the bicycles. Or another fixed asset that I had in that retail store was all of the racks and the clothing racks that we would put inventory out on. So those were all assets. If you're in construction, perhaps your heavy equipment that you own are some of your fixed assets. If you own your office building or you own the building your store is in, that's a fixed asset. So remember, assets are everything that we own. But we also have another group of people who live inside the balance sheet, and they are known as the liabilities. The liabilities is everything that we owe. And much like assets, we can break them down into two different categories. The first one we'll talk about are our short-term or current liabilities. These, just like before, are things that we think are going to turn over quickly. A really good example of a current liability are our accounts payable, or the bills that we've got it sitting there that we need to pay. Those are current liabilities. We also have long-term liabilities. This is also known as debt. So this is probably the loans that we have to pay for a lot of our fixed assets. So if you've got a company car, the car is a fixed asset. If you bought it and you're making loan payments on it, then the loan payment is your debt. If you bought an office building, the office building is a fixed asset. The money you owe against that building is your debt, is a long-term liability. Now, what we do when we're thinking about the characters in this house is we pinpoint which one of our characters are each of these, current or fixed asset, or current or long-term liability. And then we will add these up. So we'll end up with total assets. We'll add these up, and we end up with total liabilities. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. The balance sheet's probably my favorite financial statement. And the reason for that is once we add up everything we own and we subtract out, that's positive, subtract out everything that we owe, this gives us a fantastic number. This tells us our net worth. I always like to look at this. I like to know what my net worth is. This one excites me. And this is how we can tell if someone is a millionaire. So if you add up all of the assets that a person owns, and then you subtract out everything they owe, if this number is $1 million or higher, then someone is a millionaire. And that's how it works. It took me a little while to convince my now 12-year-old daughter when she was younger that millionaires weren't just walking around with $1 million in their pocket. That's not the way it works at all. As a matter of fact, they might not even have $1 million sitting in a bank account somewhere so that they could just write a check for $1 million. Being a millionaire is something that happens on paper, and it happens on the balance sheet. They might not have any money. Perhaps they appear, if you looked at this and saw their cash on hand, perhaps they had no cash on hand at all. But still, total assets minus total liabilities was still over $1 million. No cash on hand, but still a millionaire. So in accounting, they do something that's really interesting. And I'll be honest with you, I don't understand it. I've asked accountants, I've asked scholars, like, why do you do this? I don't know why they do this. But at this point, accountants will do something really crazy, and they'll assign some arbitrary number here so that they can subtract this number out of your net worth to get it to zero. And when that gets to zero, they say it balances. The truth is, as a business owner, all these years, I've never cared if it balanced. That meant nothing to me. What meant something to me was that number. So that's everyone who lives in the balance house. Let's go talk about our final house, the fourth house, and then we'll go back and think about how all of these kind of interact with each other. And what do they mean? The last house in our story is the cash house. And this is where all the cashes live. This is going to be our cash flow statement. And much like it sounds, the people who live there, last name's Cash, or maybe first name, however you want to think about it. The first person who lives there is cash in. This is all of the cash that we actually take into the business. The second character that lives there is called cash out. This is all of the money that we pay out, or the cash we pay out of the business. Subtract cash out from cash in, and this gives us cash on hand. Now, we've heard of this character before. We saw this character over here in the balance house too, didn't we? We did. I can tell you this, that this number, cash on hand, and this cash on hand, if the financial statements are run at the same time, are the exact same number. But this is where it's recorded on the balance sheet. So yes, those are in fact reflective of each other. Now, speaking of time periods, how do we run these? Remember, we said the income statement runs for a specific time period that we choose. Perhaps it's for the month. A cash flow statement is run the same way. So it is for a specific time period. We're going to look at them for monthly, so January, February, March. But you can choose whatever time period you want to look at. Daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly, or even yearly. You choose depending upon how it is that you want to read your story and how you want to write it. The balance sheet, though, does not run for a specific time period. A balance sheet is a I spelled that wrong. A balance sheet is a snapshot in time. Think about it in terms of bounded rationale that we've talked about in the circle that we have around us. And we know that based on time, that circle is going to get bigger and or change based on the experiences. And at any moment in time, our boundary and the knowledge that we have is reflective of that moment in time. It's the same for a balance sheet. The balance sheet is reflective of a specific moment in time. And so it would be reflective of from the day we open till today. And I could run a balance sheet for myself right now and find out what my net worth is. Things are going to change. Sales are going to be made, cash is going to come in, cash is going to go out, cash on hand is going to change. And 3 hours from now, I could run another balance sheet and it would look completely different. So it is a snapshot in time. Now for this number and this number to be exactly the same, they have to be run at specifically the same time. So I hope that makes sense. Now, these are the 4 houses in our story. We've got the startup cost house. Now, the startup cost house is everything that we buy or spend money on prior to opening our business. After we open our business, we don't put anything else into the startup cost house. And as a matter of fact, all the characters who live here are going to move into one of these houses, right? Don't worry about trying to adjust where they move. That's for the accountant to do. Let them worry about how to incorporate them in and let the accountant be your moving company. So after we open, then we're really going to be looking at these 3 houses, the P&L house and everyone who lives there, the balance house and everyone who lives there, and the cash house and everyone who lives there. I want to talk to you just a little bit more about how we look at these numbers and how they're going to interact with each other and point out some important things to you. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is the P&L. Now with the P&L here, we said this is where sales live. Now it's important now that we understand that there are 2 different types of processes for doing accounting. There's 2 different ways we could do it. The first one is called a cash basis. Now, cash accounting is when everything that we pay for, we pay cash. And everything that people buy from us, they give us cash. Now, this used to be the way that most businesses operated, but we know now that very few businesses operate that way anymore. If you use a credit card, you're not working on a cash basis. If you write a check, you're not working on a cash basis, because that means that there is a delay from the time that the sales transaction occurs until money actually exchanges hands. If you use your credit card all month to go to the grocery store and buy groceries, you've actually already completed the sales transaction. You've bought the groceries. You've probably already taken them home and eaten them. You've probably consumed them and they're gone. But the credit card bill doesn't come to the end of the month. So it's not until the end of the month that money actually exchanges hands, or that you actually have any cash out, here. So it's important to understand that in business, we will be operating on the accrual basis. That means sales transactions can occur, and that's us buying things or selling things, but there is a delay in when cash actually exchanges hands, the accrual basis. In order to be sure that we are telling the story correctly and that we have all the characters in the right houses, it's important for us to understand that this is why we should bring an accountant in on our acquisition team early. Bring them in and let them set up your accounting software and your chart of accounts. Now, you read about those chart of accounts, and I can't remember, you guys are reading chapters 37, 38, and 39. And in there, you're introduced to the chart of accounts. Accountants can set these up for you and do it in the beginning. It's really hard to clean it up after the fact, so start it out right. But they're going to set up these chart of accounts for you. And then when you go into your accounting software, and I suggest you use them, you can use QuickBooks, Quicken, there's several others out there. As long as you choose the right account, when you key in your invoice or whatever it is you're keying in, then when you print out your financial statements at the end of the month, every one of the characters is going to be in the house they're supposed to be in, and your story is going to read in the proper way. But if you don't have it set up correctly, then some of the transactions can show up in the wrong houses, and then it would be a complete mess, and you would really have no idea how to see how your company is performing. So be sure you bring in the accountant, use the accrual basis, and set up your chart of accounts early. Do it in the beginning. Now, good news for you if you've ever had Accounting 210. In Accounting 210, I believe they still make you learn accounting by doing the double entry bookkeeping method. Great news. You never have to do that again, ever, not unless you're going to be an accountant. The accounting softwares that exist will do all of that for you, all of that, which is fantastic. We never have to do that double entry bookkeeping again. Just make sure the accountant sets up your chart of accounts, and be sure that you're careful when you input things that you select the correct account. So what's going to happen here is you're going to print out your financial statements from your accounting software at the end of the month. It's going to give you a P&L statement. It's going to give you a balance sheet. It's going to give you a cash flow statement. And over time, as we start looking at these statements, we're going to be able to read a longer and longer story. And we're going to be able to see how our business is doing. If we don't like how it's doing, then we can start to manipulate our story or rewrite it so that it does look the way that we want it to. In the beginning, you can see it's easier after your business has been open for a while to read your story and make adjustments. But in the beginning, it's a little bit different. We don't have a history of operations or a history of sales so that we can read that story. Instead, we have to estimate what we think our first year is going to look like. And when we make those estimates, that's called pro forma. Oops, those are pro forma financial statements. In your final project, you're going to have to create pro forma income statements for the first 12 months of your business. Now, we'll talk more next week about how to do that in detail. So don't fret. It's really not as hard as you think it is. Think about it like this. Perhaps some of you have gone through an exercise where you were asked to set goals. Where do you want to be 5 years from now? What is your goal? And you set that goal. After you do that, you work backwards and you make mini goals to help you achieve your overall goal that you want to hit in 5 years. It's kind of the same when we're doing our pro forma financial statements. We're going to have some goals on where we want to go, and we're going to do some due diligence to help us set those goals. And then we're going to go back and make some pro forma financial statements. They're going to show us mini goals, and it's going to be the story we want to tell, and it's going to read the way we want it to read. And from there, as we start executing, then we're going to be able to compare our actual financial statements to our pro forma and see how we're doing. Maybe we're doing better. Maybe we're right on target, or perhaps we're not doing as well as we thought we would. Then we can start to make adjustments to get our actual story closer to where we want it to be. So I hope that's all making sense for you. I told you guys that it's not uncommon to have an entrepreneur or a business owner who really can't read financial statements, who can't read their own story. If you can't read your own story, you can't write it, and you certainly can't correct it in as an efficient a way as you would need to. So as much as we might not enjoy the numbers part of this, it is a necessary evil. We must learn how to do it, and we must learn how to do it well. Now that I've started thinking about my financial statements more in the form of a story and about the characters who live in the houses, and now that I've learned how each of these characters kind of work together and how the houses work together, it's not as daunting or as intimidating for me at all. Actually, it's much easier. I don't mind it anymore at all. Now, what I want you to do between now and next class is to be sure that you get really familiar with each house and which characters live in the house. It's hard for you to write a story about characters if you don't know who they are and you don't know where they live. So spend some time figuring that out. Now, I know I gave you quite a bit to read with the chapters in the book and also with the PowerPoints. But let me tell you what the PowerPoints are. The PowerPoints are really more of a summary of bringing together all the information that's in the book, and then I supplemented some. Last spring, when we had to go online all of a sudden because of the pandemic, I had to start teaching financials statements online. And so I created those PowerPoints as an easier way for you, after you've read the book, to start to understand how it all kind of flows and how it all works together, and to give you a different mindset about money and a different mindset when it comes to trying to read and interpret financial statements. So please spend some time, like I said, learning the different houses that are in your story, learn who lives in each one of the houses. And the next week, we're going to have some more conversations about how do we fill in the numbers, what do each one of these characters look like, how do they work together, and how do we really start to think about each one of these financial statements in terms of starting a business. You're going to need to do all of this, and you're going to have this on the next test, but also you're going to have to do this within your final project. So be really familiar with what they all are. This is a good time for you to go to the PowerPoints that are called Money, the Great Performance Measure, and look at those and be sure that you understand all of it. This is going to be beneficial for you as we start to, like I said, make estimates about what might our pro formas might look like. But we're also going to need to know how to do this really well, because there's going to be times when we need money. And when we start to go get money, there's going to be a lot of things that play into where we go to get the money, and how much money we need. So how do we make all those decisions? And I'm going to help you next week to figure all of that out. I hope that all of you have a great weekend, and next few days. I will see you next class, where we'll pick up this conversation right where we are, and we will continue it and learn much more about how to read, write, and change our financial story. Hope that you all Have a great week. Let me stop sharing here. There we go. Thanks, guys.